Been looking at your charts today?
I think it's going down at the moment.
I think, to be honest, I'm more of a macro trader, like long term. I'll invest in Bitcoin because I believe in the fundamentals of it and the mathematics of it, with reward halving and scarcity, and the fact that there's so many Bitcoins which are missing or people have lost passwords. So there's probably only about 17 million potential Bitcoins, not 21 million. And after the SegWit upgrades, it seemed the transaction costs have fallen back down. You know, if you remember last year, they were like $10, $20, and it's gone back down into the cents. We're back to where Bitcoin can actually be used for transactions. It's still a bit slow at the moment, but we're getting more and more Lightning nodes added to the network all the time, and I think that's potentially a good scaling solution that will make a difference when it comes to fruition. But it's interesting because if you look at the media, the mass media or the establishment media, Eric, you see they're still pretty negative on the whole thing. With news of the ETFs recently, there was a bit of a bullish sentiment bubbling up again. But then as soon as we had a little bit of bad news about the Winklevoss ETF, again, it was like all the way down again. And,
but it was quite controlled that time.
Yeah.
It didn't do a proper dive. I don't think it reacted as badly as I thought.
Yeah, but then I think the establishment, whether you call them the banks or the governments or the big boys who are heavily into the older assets, like the established assets, I would say, like gold and equities, they'll jump on board at any given opportunity to try and bring it down, don't they? Don't you think?
Without a doubt, I think they're there for that main purpose, really.
Yeah.
They've got no agenda other than...
Have you heard of this guy, Paul Krugman? I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
He's
he's well renowned.
He won a Nobel Prize, didn't he, for economics, and he writes for the New York Times. So he's done this opinion piece on 31st of July explaining why he's a crypto skeptic. I mean, we know his pals, Warren Buffett and the like. I mean, I do respect Warren Buffett, but he hasn't got on board with cryptocurrency. And if you listen to him, the description of it is rat poison squared, which is quite funny. And it's quite metaphorical. His VC manager, Charlie Munger, was quoted as saying that it's as bad as trading harvested baby brains. So, but this guy, Paul Krugman, right, he's done this article, and he reckons that it's all going to zero, basically. He talks about the fact that it's transaction costs and the absence of tethering, which will bring down Bitcoin. So obviously he's a mainstream economist and he believes in capitalism. He believes in the system of banks and fiat money that we've got. So what he says is that over history, we've gone from originally using things like gold and silver to then using money that was printed by governments but was still backed by gold and silver, so fractional reserve banking. And then finally, we went to fiat currencies, which weren't backed by anything. So he says, so originally, it was pretty hard to make money because you had to dig it up out of the ground, yeah, and then mint coins out of it. Then it was a little bit easier where you only needed like a certain proportion of gold kept in a central place, so fractional reserve. Based on that, you could then print banknotes, maybe 4 or 5 times, whatever it was, according to what you held in reserve. And then finally, it became really easy to print money, just at a touch of a button. And it didn't matter. You didn't really have to have any gold or silver, which is what the situation is now. And we basically just depend on the government. We basically trust the government because they are men with guns. So they're allowed to print money and we trust them, and that we trust that everybody will accept that money which is given to us by the government. So it's become easier and easier to create money over time. And then he says also for people to use money has become easier and easier as well. So where originally, again, you might have like heavy coins, then we went to checks, then we've gone to online, ways of transferring money. So for us, it's become simpler and simpler as well over time. And so he says, now with cryptocurrencies, why are we going backwards? So in his mind, he says, we're going backwards because number one, we've made it hard to create money again. Rather than just at a touch of a button, now miners have to use up so much electricity and it takes time and effort and resources. So that he sees as a negative, right? And then secondly, he says, and also for the average user, it's become more difficult because wallets are hard, to use, and complicated addresses, and there's more friction. So what do you reckon? Has he got a point?
I mean, he's right on some aspects that, yes, there is taking more electricity, which we know if you specifically look at Bitcoin. Yeah, it is. But you have to put into like a bigger perspective that this Bitcoin thing is just at its infancy. So there is still a lot of work to be done where wallets are not user-friendly.
Yeah.
There isn't any user-friendly aspect of it where you've got to transfer, exchange, buy, sell. So once all that gets covered and developed and put into the background, and at the front you just have a very simple push-button situation, I think Krugman's going to have to eat his own words.
Yeah, I think so. What he's saying is that it's 8 years after Bitcoin was launched, and cryptocurrencies have made very few inroads. This is reading from the article. He says they've made very few inroads into actual commerce. He says a few firms will accept them as payment, but he thinks this is more about signaling, like, look at me, I'm cutting edge, rather than about real usefulness. And cryptocurrencies have a large market valuation, but they're overwhelmingly being held as a speculative play, not because they're useful as mediums of exchange. So again, he thinks they're kind of just like a collectible item, and they have no real world usage.
But but I think that this is part of maybe his twist on it, where he doesn't want to prove or show any of that.
Yeah.
And I think he wants to keep it low key as possible. But there are plentiful uses at the moment, even that you obviously
I pulled
know
up a
about,
few.
and you pulled up a couple possibly.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a matter of time.
I
Where
think so.
more and more uses start to get developed, more and more acceptance and adoption of this by merchants, by companies, and so
Absolutely.
forth. It's just a very early stage.
Absolutely.
8
And
years,
it's
he's expecting something
Yeah.
to go from ground zero to be at the point of competing with $1 or something similar. In 8 years,
Yeah,
he's
it's
had
not
nearly, God knows, 800 years?
Yeah. Well, and then he goes back to this strange argument about that, cryptocurrencies are only for illegal activities like
That's
drug
just
usage.
narrow-minded.
It's like,
just been narrow-minded.
it's like really going back to the early days of Bitcoin when, it was used by Dread Pirate Roberts and what was his site called?
Pirate Bay or something?
It wasn't Pirate Bay, was it?
Silk Road?
Silk Road. So, we're well past that stage. I mean, obviously, when something's innovative, often it is, funny enough, the underworld or criminals who'll make use of it first. That doesn't mean to say that's the only use of it, as we all know.
But if you think about it from their perspective, when they first introduced money, I'm sure they used guns and force and all sorts to make people use their money. It's possible to move them away from bartering or whatever else that they were doing. Yeah. So does that mean that their money was in a similar line? Yeah.
That's right. I mean, and then he comes up with this other explanation about why cryptocurrencies are useless, and he says they have no tether to reality. So what he means by that is that if you're using the dollar, it's just a piece of paper. So why does it have value? And he says, well, because there is an actual real world use of it where your government will always accept that green paper as payment for taxes. So you can always have a use for it. And gold, for example, he says, it'll always have a real world use. Yes, you can. Why is it really money, or is it just made up? Well, no, because it's got a real world use where people use it for jewelry, or, for example, fillings in your teeth. Or I know you use it in chemistry. I mean, you've got a chemistry background. You'd probably know more about that than me. So, but he says, well, crypto has got no real world tether. So I was just thinking about that. Has he got a point to that? I mean, what do you think?
I think it's still back to the point where I think he's slating something that's so early in its infancy. But if you look at it, to the point where he says fiat is backed by governments. Yeah, he's right. Yeah, so it's tethered to something. But look at Venezuela. Look at the situation there. If you take that example, where you have unstable fiat with a massive 1 million inflation rate.
Absolutely.
For example. So now, does he also include that fiat as being something that is no longer
tethered
viable,
to reality?
Is viable as a product that is tethered to something that you can then say, that is usable, that is practical today. Actually, it isn't. You have an extreme situation now where certain fiats are no longer attainable.
Yeah, I mean,
and people are moving
absolutely
for alternatives. And guess what's coming forward?
Yeah.
It's crypto, and they just don't want them to move down that route, because the first live country example that comes through will be a detriment to any other fiat currency.
I mean, the inflation rate in Venezuela last year was more than 2,600%, and the government recently released 100,000 Bolivar note, and that's just worth less than 50 cents. So it's just insane. I mean, people, it's back to the Weimar Republic example of people carrying trolley loads full of banknotes to do their shopping. But what's happened now is people have been using Bitcoin because it's more stable than that country's currency.
Their existing currency, yeah.
And it avoids the restrictions of holding foreign currency. Mm-hmm. So they're bypassing their government's restriction. Now the government has tried to create their own cryptocurrency called the Petro.
That's right. Yeah. It's backed by.
They're saying it's backed by their oil. Yeah,
and absolutely. It will be later by possibly.
So gold. I don't know whether that'll be accepted by the people or not. But I mean, if you've got something which has got any kind of government control and the government's been shown to be incompetent, then I don't see why people would not just use Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've got options, Dennis. You'll have a certain number of people that will want to use it, others will not know about it, so that's part of the problem. Yeah. But in situations like that where they're dire straits, they will look at alternatives, and they will open-mindedly look at alternatives. Because if I take you back to a very factual past example of post-World War II, where the highest ever inflation rate recorded, believe this or not, was in Hungary in post-World War II. And it held and still has the record for the most extreme monthly inflation rate of, and I can't even say this, is 41 quadrillion %.
Wow.
For July 1946, amounting to prices doubling every 15.3 hours.
It's crazy.
Collapsed.
It's just collapsed. It's basically, it could be an infinity number of inflation, because if your currency is collapsed, then nobody wants it.
Out of control, doesn't
Nobody
it?
wants it.
So what's your way out of that then?
Yeah,
when you look at it, so look at Venezuela's example.
Exactly.
And I think Brazil is suffering similar circumstances as well. I think a few times I heard similar instances there.
I mean, if you look at, in the article, he says, and this made me chuckle a bit, right? He says that he's trying to justify fiat currencies, and he says banknotes work because people know something about the banks that issued them, and these banks had an incentive to preserve their reputation. Okay, tell that to Lehman's, yeah? Mm-hmm. Governments have occasionally abused the privilege of creating fiat money, but for the most part, governments and central banks exercise restraint, again because they care about their reputations. I mean, where's this guy been since 2008? The quantitative easing policies just in America have created over $4 trillion of new money. So I don't see
out of
thin air. So I don't see that as being responsible or governments caring about their reputation. It's all a massive experiment. Interest rates, we all know that printing money ends up in inflation, like the examples you're giving, which are extreme examples. The governments spiral out of control and they print too much. It leads to hyperinflation. It's always been the case, and unless there's some magic new economics at play, well, they may have learnt from past history and done something different. I don't know. We will see. I mean, interest rates have just now started to go up this year in the US, and the UK's just put up their base rates as well. So this could all end in misery, and Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies could well be the answer. These guys don't accept that, and they're unwilling to look at that as an alternative, because it kind of sweeps away their whole way of life, their whole way of existence, and it's a new paradigm. So they don't necessarily understand it. I wonder if anybody understands it. It's an emerging phenomenon. You know, how will it play out? What will cryptocurrencies be like in 10 years' time? You know, will they work? We're just, as you said, we're just in the infancy. I was looking at the first ever World Wide Web page the other day, just out of interest, and have a guess when the first World Wide Web page was put online.
1990?
Yeah, almost. 1991.
Okay.
And I'll put it up here for you to see. But it's pretty basic, but it's got all the elements that you know, right, of a simple HTML page. But that was only 1991. So what's that? 27 years? 27 years.
I'm sure I put a web page up that had one line on it.
Yeah,
Does that still count?
Yeah, yours looks like this now if you put one up. Looks like your CV. But the funny thing is, as a parallel to what this guy's saying, Krugman or Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger, there's this chap in 1995, so 4 years after it came out. This chap was called, what's his name here? Clifford Stoll, and he was a US astronomer and author and someone you'd expect to have technological background and a view of the future. And it was amazing the things he was saying in those days about the internet, about the early internet. So here he says, visionaries see a future of telecommuting workers, interactive libraries and multimedia classrooms. They speak of electronic town meetings and virtual communities. Commerce and business will shift from offices and malls to networks and modems. And the freedom of digital networks will make government more democratic. Baloney. That's amazing.
But you see, people like that are always going to be there. And I think if you go back to your Krugman, Paul Krugman chap, in 1998, he famously predicted that by 2005, also, it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machine. That was him then.
Is that what he said?
That's what he said.
Wow.
That was his words. Okay.
Right.
So taking that on again, he said, on the rise of communication networks, he said, they'll fail because most people have nothing to say to each other. Where's social media today? Yeah. So in a nutshell, I think I'd sum up Paul Krugman as he's not part of the solution. He's actually part of the problem.
He's just the old guard. It makes you think, are they just really that out of touch, or are they just unwilling to embrace the future? Can they simply not see it? Or is it something more sinister? Is it like they're trying to hold it back? They don't want change. Is it simple as that?
I think that people like Krugman have these respectable positions, and he's obviously a famed economist for the years of the awards that he's won. But it's no surprise that those awards have possibly come from all of the people he works with and, whose backs he's scratching, because he's writing stories in line and in favour with what they want to portray the market to be doing or perceived to be doing. So in his case, he's made a career out of being wrong about things, and he's wrong again about Bitcoin.
Or is there a coordinating entity behind it all? So, right, we need to have a unified message going out to the sheep of the world. We've got to keep them away from this new technology, which is going to wipe away our way of life, or all the banking cartels. Governments are obviously scared of losing control of money. So is it that? Is it kind of more of a conspiracy of the powers that be coming together and putting out these stories across the establishment media channels to keep people away, maybe even until these guys can find a fresh footing or work their way into it or become the masters of this new technology? As we all know, certain banks are looking into their own blockchain technologies, corporations, even Microsoft, Apple, all of these guys, they are looking at their own kind of blockchain solutions. So is it that let's hold back the tide until we can get in there and impose our control?
I think it's probably a number of things along with what you've said. And it's no surprise where there is probably a power behind that is looking to find a way to manage this situation and manage, when I say manage, for its own purpose or benefit. Not for
direct it.
Correct. So they want to manage and control it in a way that they have at least some way of pulling the strings or the reins on this horse if they need to at any point. The fact that it's a technology they don't have full control of, they can't grab it in the way they want. Because if I give you an example of what Krugman said versus reality, where he said, instead of near frictionless transactions with fiat, we have high costs of doing business because transferring a Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency unit requires providing a complete history of past transactions.
Just stupid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't need that. That's just there for you to explore if you want to.
Well, the miners build upon the complete history. You don't provide a complete history every time you're sending some Bitcoin.
But this shows you how he's so ignorant to the technology because he doesn't understand.
I think he's not ignorant. He thinks we're all ignorant. He must have advisors. But, he thinks the rest of us are all ignorant. and unable to find out for ourselves. I mean,
But that's like saying that you're making a payment to me through the bank. Yeah, you're going to make a payment to me, and then your bank is going to search all your historical data, to see have you got enough money in the bank to pay me. But it's not relevant. All that's relevant is at that time, do you have that money there to transfer out?
Well, obviously, I mean, yeah.
But he's just taking it.
He's basically trying to misdirect people, and he's misrepresenting the reality. So I think the whole article just discredits him. And as you say, he said similar things about the internet back in the day. So the thing is, I know we're picking on him, but he's just one of the mouthpieces of the establishment. And there's many others, which we can obviously touch on again. And they're all giving this kind of negative sentiment out to the market. And often it seems to be something that they're doing on purpose to keep the rest of us away or make weak hands sell their holdings so that these guys can accumulate it. And then when the time's right, when they've got their fill, when they feel they've got enough to control, then you'll get the opposite. Then you'll get the the positive messages coming through from all these portals like the New York Times and Bloomberg.
Sure, and I think with this Paul Krugman article, like just finishing off on him, that he has obviously an esteemed reputation behind him. Yet this is the best. Well, this is the best he could do. In terms of attacking Bitcoin. Yeah. I'm sure he'll keep continuing because as he's learning, because he's still at the infancy himself, I believe, in understanding what actual crypto and what Bitcoin is. So let him carry on because I'm sure you're going to see a charade of these coming through over the years. But absolutely. I think maybe what you should look at now is maybe you want to share what exactly is there in contrast to what he's saying in terms of its
there's
real life
plenty.
situation? Can you give me some examples? I have a few in my mind where people are buying Ferraris.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, we are really at that 1995 stage where we're not 1991. Bitcoin's been around for a bit now, but we are still early days. We're just finding our feet and the technology is maturing, but it's got a lot more to go. What we'll have in 10 years or 15 years it's going to be unrecognizable. But even now, I mean, there are things such as,
can I buy coffee somewhere? Is there anywhere I can buy coffee?
Yeah, there will be. I mean, you just have to search it up. Well, check this out. I mean, this website called proppy.com. I've just searched for London, and you can buy property with cryptocurrency. So here you go. There's a two-bedroom apartment in London E7, $371,000, or as you can see, it says buy with cryptocurrency. I mean, that's a real world use, surely. And these Chinese millionaires, according to this article, they're really making use of it. To bypass their government's control, the Chinese millionaires are using Bitcoin to buy properties overseas. And here is another website which allows you to buy flights using Bitcoin. And when Paul Krugman says there's no tether to reality, to be honest, there are certain cryptocurrencies that implement smart contracts which will tether to real-world assets. So whether it's gold, I mean, you can buy gold bullion as well, or whether it's, you're registering your house, your car, your gold, whatever, onto a blockchain, and that represents your asset. And so that will, I don't know whether they're actually operational now, but there's plenty of these projects in the pipeline, and those are going to be real tethers to real world assets. Okay, and it's securitization of real world assets. And when you get ETFs, you could say, when the ETFs are passed, you could say that's a tether to a real world asset. So your ETF will actually, it goes both ways, I suppose. The ETF represents the Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin is tethered to the ETF, which people are going to be trading. It's real world,
Well,
it's just
crazy.
Up
to the masses, isn't it? That's when it opens up to the masses.
Yeah.
Do you know what? One funny thing I'd like to see, and I'd like to end, if there is, or becomes available on the blockchain for Bitcoin, some form of smart contract, that the day that Paul Krugman buys Bitcoin, that the smart contract activates that his value of Bitcoin goes to zero.
Yeah, you could place a bet on about that.
I'd love to see something like that so that he can never enter Bitcoin and say, you are the guy that slated me.
That'd be an interesting bet on Olga.
Or maybe on Ogre.
Yeah, on the Ogre prediction markets.
Oh, so yeah, that might be a good one to throw one on there.
Well, I mean, if anyone has any other interesting ideas on this, we'd love to hear them in the comments. So please like the video if you enjoyed this, and if you didn't, just leave some comment. Yeah, it's all right. We can take it. I got a thick skin. Eric, you got a thick skin. Yeah, we can take it. No worries. And we'll see you guys again.
Yeah, love
Cheers.
to hear your opinions on this and where you side on it, because it's always nice to know. Thank you, guys.
Bye.